progressive voice of Minnesota, Doug Pagettin. It's 4:06 on September 11th, 2018. And, Brett, I don't know if you have a fine-tuned memory of September 11th, 2001, but I do. I have a pretty fine-tuned memory about that date.
Oh, I do as well. Yeah, let's hear yours.
Well, I'll just preface it with this, that there's a guy named Malcolm Gladwell who does a podcast called Revisionist History. And, when you're sort of in between radio shows and AM 950 and you can't get enough audio in your ears, you ought to give a listen to it. He does one on memory, and one of the great memory experiments that people who study memory do are around catalytic events, or what they call, I think they're called traumatic events. And they measure people's memories 1 year, 5 years, 10 years out from those memories by having the person write down after a significant activity event happens, like detailing where you were on September 11th is one that they did, and what you were feeling, where you were, who you were with, what you said, this kind of details. Then they come back a year later, 5 years later, and 10 years later and have you recount what your memory was. And there's like a 60% drop-off after 1 year even, and certainly 60% after 5 years and 10 years, when people's memory of, when they recount their memory of that day being different from what they have written down from the time that it happened. It's amazing, and it's these big memory studies that say basically we don't really remember the things about where we were, what we were doing. We think we do because we remember our memories. We don't remember the event, and every time we have a memory, it resets our memory pattern. So anyway, the best I can remember it, that September 11th was a Tuesday, just like today is a Tuesday. So we're in that kind of sequence, and I haven't looked back at the forecast from September 11th, 2001. But I swear it was a day just like today. What I remember on that day was the sky felt like this, the air felt like this. Like there's something about our repeating weather patterns that really had this kind of feel to it. It was one of those beautiful days that felt so heavy and so confusing. Do you happen to remember the weather on the day of September 11th, 2001?
I kind of do, and I do remember it being, sunny, and as you said, a lot like this. I don't remember the temperature, but I remember it being very sunny, though.
Yeah, and kind of a day like this, and in New York, of course, it was, because that was one of the noticeable features of that day, was just how big the sky was and watching the airplanes fly into those buildings. And I remember my daughter was 10 years old, almost to turn 11. Maybe she was 11 years old when that happened. And boy, this event is a true marker in her memory. Like she remembers the way she felt. She remembers how scared she was. It was a really powerful event for her in her life. And so I'm wondering if any of the callers have memories about this too. And on this point, at least on this day, don't want to jump into all your explanations about what really happened on that day. I'm more interested in your memories about what happened that day. Because part of what surprises me is that 17 years later, we are continuing this narrative of never forget. And there was an opinion piece I saw today. The title of it was "How We Forgot to Never Forget," and this person is bemoaning the fact that we don't take September 11th seriously 17 years later. And I'm not trying to be at all dismissive, because it was a powerful day. It meant a lot to change world history in so many ways, and has put us in a perpetual war path for the past 17 years, into the longest war that the United States has ever been in. So just a real tragedy and travesty that has resulted from it. But I started to do the numbers, right? So if you look back from 2018, where we are now on September 11th, back to September 11th, 2001, of course, that doesn't take a math major to know that. That's 17 years. Well, that's the same amount of time between the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 and 1958. Now, in my memory of watching things about the 40s and 50s, 1940 and 41 seems so far from the American expression of 1958. Right? Like they just feel worlds apart. The war was over. People, this robust thing was happening. Houses were being built. The GI Bill was unfolding. There was just kind of the stories that you would see on Happy Days, were all supposed to be happening. Like 1958 just feels so different from 1941. And I got to say, and maybe it's just somebody being 52 years old, but I don't feel like 2018 is as far from 2011 as my perception of 1941 was from 1958. Like we're still, well, I feel like we're in a quagmire around this thing. And maybe it's because this whole we'll never forget thing has got us stuck in it.
I could kind of agree with that. I would even say if you were to just walk around outside in a city block for maybe 5 or 6 minutes or so between 1941 and 1958, I'm guessing it would look a lot different as compared to doing it from 2001 to 2018, where I think things will look somewhat similar to how they did back then.
I know. Isn't it curious? Like we totally live in this time of the most expansive technological advances, especially around communication and media. But boy, on some other factors, man, it is not that long ago. I did another calculations on 3 more of these. The Bay of Pigs, which was a big deal before I was born. It was sort of this big crisis moment around what was happening in world events. Well, that was in 1961. 17 years after that is 1978. I remember 1978. I mean, I was a 12-year-old kid in 1978. The Bay of Pigs business was just an eternity before that. Like it was so long ago. I don't remember anybody even talking about, remember the Bay of Pigs. It felt like we had turned a corner. I thought about the shuttle explosion, which was a big deal in my college years in 1986. I don't know if that was one that is in your memory. Were you alive in 1986, Brett?
I was 1 year old. So
you were a 1 year old.
Alive, but not really paying attention.
So maybe you hear about the shuttle explosion. It was a big deal. There was a school teacher that was on there. McAuliffe, I think was her name. So yeah, I even remember that way back. But from 1986, 17 more years, 2003. Just a lifetime of change. I mean, for you, an entire lifetime of change, right? You went from being a 1 year old to being an 18-year-old. That is an enormous amount of time difference. Richard Nixon resigns in 1974. You add 17 years onto that. You're in 1991.
That might be the craziest one to be, 74 to 91, just how different the world was in those 17 years, or it became.
I know. I mean, just so much shift. So there's something, I don't know what my critique is. I don't know what my commentary is about this. Just noticing that this worry that we're going to forget. I'm not saying we should forget, but I don't know. It feels to me like we have to find a way to move on. We have to put this thing to bed. It has been going on for so long. I mean, so much longer than Vietnam, so much longer than everything else that has ever happened. All this period of time between these catalytic events, 41 to 58, 61 to 78, 86 to 2003, 74 to 91, like is so far. And it just feels like we have to find a way as a country to come to resolve, to honor it, to pay attention to it, to, of course, see what came out of it and to critique it. But I don't know, at some point, we can't keep revisiting the September 11th, 2001 narrative because it feels to me like, I don't know, we're stuck in some ways. But what I'm thoughtful about is that there's some junior or senior in high school, if she's quite advanced in her classing, that was born, September 12th, 2001. And her entire lifetime, now a junior or senior in high school, and she has this has been something that happened before she was born, and it is hanging over. And she is a 17-year-old at this point. It really strikes me.
In a few years, we're going to be at the point where no high schoolers will have been alive when 9/11 occurred.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, that is very soon. And maybe the 20-year point will put it to bed. I'm not sure, and which we can call it history and not the present. I don't know when a society decides that a culminating act of such power does become part of history. And you don't forget it when it becomes history, but you acknowledge that it becomes history. Hey, Marvin in Minneapolis, you have some thoughts about 9/11.
Thanks, Doug. I like your exercise from back in 1973. My first recollection of a major event, any significance, was the assassination of JFK. I was 4 years old. It was at the northern Wisconsin. My mother was bartending at a family bar business in northern Wisconsin. It was the day before the opening day of the season, sun season in Wisconsin. And this guy walked in at a hunting town about a quarter mile away from the tavern. Barb! Bug kept Barb, don't the TV on the bar? Oh, what happened? You heard? JFK kid was shot. Well, he never got shot a mile out in the world. I was out in the bar helping my mom get my things ready. I was about 4 years old. I was, probably watching glasses or whatever.
Hey, Marvin, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm having a little hard time hearing you, but I can hear that you're saying that for you a major event was the assassination of John Kennedy, 1963, huh? And you go to 17 years on that, and you're all the way up to 1980. I remember 1980, and the difference was just massive. And we still remember that, but I think we have to find a way to deal with it that doesn't keep it lingering in the same way. Hey, Julie from Minneapolis, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Hope my phone doesn't break up. My mother was in college here in Minneapolis during World War II, and I asked her which was worse, Pearl Harbor or 9/11, and she said, 9/11. It was more traumatic in her mind. I just wanted to jump in quick. Now, I recall what my memory is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Giuliani and others said, it's safe, after 9/11. Come here, help the people clean up. And it turned out it wasn't safe. There was terribly toxic things that people were exposed to, and there have been many lawsuits and so forth. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that up. I mean, there's
really
still
glad
people
you did,
that are
Julie.
suffering that passed away from lung cancer from all that. And it's my recollection that they did tell people it was safe, and then it didn't turn out to be. So there are people today even that are suffering from the effects from that. I mean, as far as getting it over with.
Julie, that's a great point. That's
like putting it behind them.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think we should always remember this, because for a lot of people, that event is their present. That's a really good point, that they're not able to put that in the past because they're still suffering from the effects of being a responder and taking care of their. Hey, Allie from South Minneapolis, we just have a couple of seconds. If you've got a comment, though, we'd love to squeeze you in this segment. Hey, Allie. Allie, we'll take that as a cue to head into the commercials. Hey, this is AM 950, Progressive Voice of Minnesota, September 11th, 2018 edition. Brett, if you ask 100 people on the street, tell me a Bruce Springsteen song, about 98 of them will say Born in the USA. That little number. And all the Springsteen fans out there, they know that that's a good pick on your behalf, picking that one, because that is actually a dirge. The original version of that is sung in a very dirgy tone, and it's a critique of the American experience, that you're born in the USA, but the promises haven't been fulfilled. Great Springsteen song.
And I'd say about 90% of the people think, well, that's a super patriotic song, but it's much different than the title of the song suggests.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Ronald Reagan was using it as his campaign theme song in 1984, and Bruce Springsteen had to ask him to stop. And it said, and by the way, it's a bit of a critique about the unfulfilled promise of the American dream for people. So not sure you even want to be using it, but that was back when a Republican president, the worst thing they would do would be to co-opt a song as opposed to co-opting truth and to degrade the presidency into a reality TV show bust. Hey, Allie, thanks for hanging on. I know that you tried to get in before the break, and I appreciate your thoughts here on 9/11 as well.
Well, thank you. No, that was the first thought I had, was about the quiet at the airport. The second was my daughter was in New York working for a television company at the time, and one of my coworkers said to me, "Where is Aaron?" And I went, "Oh, good grief, I don't know." And then about an hour later, I got a call, and she said, "If I can find my way to work, I might be able to use the landline." And then the phone went click. Oh. That was the end of it, because they shut down cell phone service in New York, and I didn't hear from her for 2 days. And it's like, you know what a mother does when she doesn't hear from a kid? It was awful.
Oh, I can only imagine, Allie, and the emotion of that, I can tell is still in your voice, huh?
Yeah, and she's a lot older now and a lot wiser, but still, it was one of those events that you say that people lose 60% of it.
Yeah,
I could probably walk you through the entire scenario
I bet
that
you
day.
Can. I bet you can. You have a lot of reasons to remember that story. And how's your daughter? Is she okay?
Oh, she lives through. She draws down lightning like no other child I've ever had. She's been in a auto accident in Poland that almost killed her. She was at 9/11. she just does it, and she's a great kid, and I love them all. So
wow, that's awesome.
No complaints.
That's a great phrase. She draws down lightning like no other. What does that phrase mean?
Well,
like she's always in the heart of the energy. She's always in the center of the action.
She was the last of the line. She was a very complicated kid. She had 2 surgeries on her kidneys before she was a year old. I could go on and on and on. She's one of those people and she's incredibly talented and incredibly warm and loving. And what her goal in life is now is she is a psychic.
Is she really?
Yes, and a darn good one too. It's scary, but she is one of those people who the Creator blessed her with a different kind of energy than I'll ever have in my whole life. So that's she isn't afraid of events or that sort of thing. She's really well balanced.
Wow. Well, what a nice tribute. Thanks, Allie, for calling. I really appreciate it.
Doug, take care.
Bye now. Hey, isn't that a fun story? And by the way, I don't know any psychics. I hear of them. I see them on TV. I don't know any. Brett, do you know any psychics? Are you a psychic seer?
I am not, but one of our weekend shows did a pre-recorded episode where they had a psychic in.
Yeah.
And that's about as close as I've been to having one in my presence. They did not take any readings on me, though.
No, they're not gonna get that close to figuring out.
No, they didn't do any on me. No.
Well, they probably knew that. They probably knew that. See, I mean, I just can't. I have a whole string of psychic quips in my mind, but I won't use any of them because I don't know any psychics, and I don't even know what I think about it. Actually, I mean, I only have positive sensibility. Like, wow, I don't know one. And I'm not sure how that's going to go. I work in the religion field, and there's a lot of people in the religion field that are really unnerved and scared or are opposed to people that are in the spiritual spaces that are a part of the non-traditional or the non-certified religious brands. Right? They kind of get concerned about that, but that doesn't throw me as much. I just don't have any personal experience with a psychic. Or know what they're like, and I don't know. Maybe Allie's daughter could call in sometime. I'd love to. We should do that. I think I'll do that. I think we'll find. If we have an astrophysicist on Fridays, we should have we'll find a day of the year where we could ask a psychic all the things that you have for a question about a psychic.
Oh, we most certainly can get the one that was on Connections Radio. I think we could pull that off.
Is that so?
Absolutely. Yep. I think we could do that.
Well, she probably knows you're calling, so get to it. See, there I did it again.
That sounds like if you have your Astrophysicist Friday, that sounds like we have a Friday show possibly lined up.
Hey, we could do an astrophysicist and an astrozenerist or whatever a psychic is called. I don't even know what that is. Yeah, that'd be kind of fun. I think that'd be a nice combination, a nice combo deal to bring those people in. Hey, and if they're the kind of psychics that can tell the future, they would be called a pollster. That's what because these pollsters, there's a fun little article to shift into politics here for a second on The Hill over at thehill.com where the top Gallup editor, so the person from the Gallup poll, they're still out trying to tell you how the 2016 data models and their polling, that the polling was actually right. It was the interpretation of the polling that was wrong. And that's why everybody got surprised at the election of Donald Trump when the polls were all saying that Hillary Clinton should have been sworn in as the president of the United States. And so there the top Gallup editor is at it again. And I'm just going to mock them for a minute. I will not mock a psychic, but I'm going to mock these pollsters because they just can't seem to say either people lied to us, we asked the wrong questions, we put the questions together in the wrong way, or somehow we came up with the wrong data. For 2 years, almost 2 years, they have been pushing hard to say that it was the model of interpretation, not the polling itself, that was the problem. And this is the kind of thing these people say that drives me out of my mind, because the polls themselves are not worth anything if there's not a data model to interpret them. So it doesn't do any good to say your poll was accurate, but the data interpretation was wrong, because the only thing any of us want is the interpretation of the poll. It's just... it drives me crazy. Here's an actual quote. In Minnesota, for example, the most recent poll before the election was 11 days old. And those state polls are very tricky anyhow because of the smaller sample size, and small difference in turnouts between big cities and rural areas could make a huge difference. The models sounded scientific, but they were relying on inferior polling at the state level in these difficult to poll states that are toss-up states. In other words, we can't do our job if it's really complicated and it's really close. Well, for the love of it all, that's the whole point, is that you're supposed to be able to tell us what people, like if your whole thing is sample sizes are too small and it's too close, then isn't that the whole reason we shouldn't be paying attention to polls? All that to say, yeah, go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say, so you might get a kick out of what 538 has done with their House forecast. They're saying now, instead of percentage chances of the Democrats winning their House, they're saying a 3 out of 4 or a 7 out of 9 chance, because they say, well, don't discount that 2 out of 9 chance that the Republicans could still hang on.
Yes.
So they're now, I think they're trying to cover themselves for that very scenario if they're wrong. Well, 2 out of 9 scenario said Republicans would maintain the House.
I mean, I don't blame them for being wrong. I blame them for acting like their being wrong is kind of not their problem. Like that's the part.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I just found
just
that funny
drives me
how
nuts.
they're trying to cover themselves now. Yeah.
And I'm just going to stop listening to them. So don't listen to the polls. You know what I want to listen to? People say go out November 6th and make sure that the polls are full, not that the polling is accurate. That's what we need to do. November 6th to get a big turnout. All right, this is AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. We're in here between 4 and 5 while you're driving home, talking about all kinds of things today. So stick with us here over the break. But I'll tell you, ever find yourself at a Bruce Springsteen concert and that Born to Run kicks up like that, it's really a magical moment. Hey, Brett, you sent over this great little article on MinnPost about the case that the Republicans are making for keeping Congress red. And I got to tell you, I think the Republicans are out of their red heads on this one. I think their idea that what people are really going to care about is the economy. I was chatting with, I'm going to just name drop here for a second. I was chatting with James Carville yesterday. Super fun, just for me to say. And
nice little name drop there.
Yeah, I should have him on the show sometime, but, I kind of like keep him to myself. If people aren't familiar with James Carville, he's famous for having said it's the economy, stupid, back in 1992 that helped to get Clinton elected, that when people were feeling the pressure of the recession of the late 90s, that they wanted to kind of change a foot, and they were going to trust that if the economy's good, then the president's going to be reelected. And if the economy's bad, the president is not going to be reelected. I don't know. There might be some truth to that when it comes to if the economy is bad. But I will tell you, had Ross Perot, just gonna click back into old timey days, back in the early 90s. Had Ross Perot not run a third party campaign against George H.W. Bush, H.W. Bush would have won re-election and Bill Clinton wouldn't become the president there and win that election in 1991. Wouldn't have happened. So it wasn't just the economy. It was a whole lot of other things. And this bluff, this belief that the economy itself is enough for Republicans to just tell people that the economy is kicked up just makes no sense, especially 2 years into a presidential term, or less than 2 years into a presidential term, because it takes a long time for economic decisions to have impact. And so if anybody's going to get credit for how the economy's been doing for the last 9 months, it's Obama. It's not Trump. They're just out of their minds, in my view. Now, I know that they think that in these battleground elections, like are happening for the House races, where Republicans, Jason Lewis and Eric Paulson, are really in trouble, they're going to lean hard into the strong economy, and they're going to try to say, hey, it was the GOP tax cut that really freed up the economy and got it blossoming, got it moving. That's just, I don't think people are going to buy it. And here's why I hope people don't buy it. Because Republicans have been saying for years that the president has very little to do with the growing economy. They had to say it when it was Bush, that the president was not the president's fault. They had to say it when it was Obama, when the economy was getting together. So now to pivot and try to say the economy is really on the ticket of the president, I don't think they're going to pull that off. But even more importantly than that, they're just full of hypocrisy around all of this thing. Here's why I think that it's not going to work. Because as it turns out, people in Minnesota at least, and I think this is true about good Americans all over the country, they're not going to get bought off. Their morals are not going to be bought off. Their sense of what's right and wrong is not for sale to a president who says, as long as the economy, which you're working so hard to create, regular old people, is going well, that you're going to just sell out the country's sensibility about its morals. We're in a situation where people don't want an amoral, corrupt Republican Party. They don't want it from the president. They don't want it from their congresspeople. They don't want it from their governors. People are fed up, and this is a fed up corruption. Throw the corrupt politicians out era. We are not in a how's the economy doing era, because if we were in that kind of an era, then Hillary Clinton would have been the president, for crying out loud. I mean, people would have been they would have been all voting the economy all the time. I don't think it's how it works, and I think the Republicans, I think that's all they've got to hold on to. So of course they're going to try to say, let's talk about the economy.
I just think too, I'm kind of happy they're running on that, because what's going to happen, because it is inevitably going to happen when that economy takes a downturn. They are literally going to have nothing to run on. If it happens this fall or even in 2020, what do they have if they don't have the economy? That's all they have to hang their hat on right now.
That's a great point. Yeah, if they, and you're assuming that these are people who, if in 2018, on September 11th of 2018, are saying that the economy is the result of the party that's in office, right? And then if the economy turns bad, they're going to have to say, oh, I guess you were right. It wasn't because of the president. Now, what I think they will say, because I think they're going to lose the House, then if the economy collapses, they're going to say, well, see, it's because we flipped Congress, both at the House and at the Senate level, and that's what they're going to blame it on. So they always find an out. I mean, they're like arguing with junior hires in the hallway when you're the hall monitor about why they shouldn't be in the hallway. There's always a response. There's always a kickback. There's always somebody who's got a reason to say why it's okay and why this isn't that. And there's no sense of logic with them at all. I mean, it's sheerly incredible.
I would think, though, they'd certainly try to blame it on Democrats, saying, oh, yeah, well, you flipped the House. And, Trump would certainly say that as well, and through a big Twitter rant. But I'm not sure that's something that would really work in a future election cycle, because he's still the guy in the White House. That's all people care about, is who's in the White House. They don't say, well, I guess congressional races flip. Right. I mean, look back to 2006. Technically, the economy collapsed when Bush was in the White House and Democrats controlled Congress. But Bush, rightfully so, got all the blame for that collapse.
Yep.
At least that's generally what the sense was in the 2008 election.
Yeah. But you know who was not saying to blame it on the Republicans? The Republicans in 2008.
Oh, of course,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing.
And they got smoked that year, yeah.
And that was only 10 years ago. Like that's a blink of an eye in September 11th calendaring. So this whole notion that they're going to try. So if you're in a conversation with a Republican and they try to pull up with you this idea that, well, the economy's doing great, and what about the stock market? And, it is so outrageous that, I mean, first of all, I don't think presidents should be blamed for that. I do think tax policy has an awful lot to do with it, and not in an 18-month window, but in a 48, 72, 96-month window has a lot to do with it. So if you go back 96 months and you look at the decisions that were made about our tax policy in this country and how the economy has been moving along because of things and decisions that were made in the first terms of the Obama administration, there are some things that were done that really did help the economy to recover from that disastrous oversight of the Republican president and Republican Congress when they drove the economy off the cliff. And now they've set it up to drive the economy off the cliff again, and they're acting like people should only look at the economy, that it's only the economy that people care about. I don't think it's true. And even if it was true in your kind of average year, you know what we're not in right now? We are not in normal land. We're not in normal partisan arguments. We're not in the typical place where people find themselves. We are in Neverland here, and this Neverland has a little devil roaming around named Donald Trump, and it's messing with everything. So every time the economy comes up, and Donald Trump gets credit for a growing economy. And I'm not even all that impressed with the growing economy because, Brett, I think you're right. I think it's a total Ponzi scheme. I think this whole economy is being ginned up, and it isn't actually even in that great of a circumstance or situation. And I'm not even saying the economy is not being evenly spread. I just think even on the places where it's not being evenly spread, it's actually a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff going on in the economy I've read about with stock buybacks and 20 people just own a ton of these stocks and are propping up the stock market. I'm not an expert on this area, but yeah, something funny seems to be kind of going on because you would think if a president is slapping tariffs on a whole bunch of countries, that should sink the economy. You think that would terrify investors. But yeah, here we are still chugging along.
Yeah, of course it is. And of course it's going to affect the economy. But here's the other thing. People we don't really know. And that's between pollsters and economists, we're really in a tough place to figure out what's going on in our political world because economists have about as much credibility as some pollsters have. Because if you were to take any of their economic models and apply what Donald Trump has done to those economic models, they would all say that we should be in some sort of catastrophe. In fact, Kellyanne Conway, advisor to President Trump, was on a news program on Sunday, and she was saying, hey, people were saying that if we do all these things, if we make all these tax cuts, if we slap on all these tariffs, if we do all this, it's going to crash the economy. Well, look, you were all wrong. It didn't crash the economy. See, everything's going great. We're the people who know. Like the rationale is what we're doing makes no sense and it's not breaking anything, so it must be the right thing. And anyone who knows what they're talking about says that breaking very well could be still in the offing. It is coming. If you knew, if we knew what was going to cause these collapses, we would see them coming, but people don't. And we've been in this raging market of economic growth for some, unrecorded period of time or a record-setting period of time. And it's gonna, unless there's some new set of rules about the economy, it's going to have to reset. It just does. It runs in these cycles. These cycles run through, and that has to be what's going on. So if Republicans want to tie themselves to that and try to convince people to set aside their morals, to set aside their convictions, to set aside their conscience, to set aside their sense that Congress should hold a renegade president accountable for his behavior, and really they're going to say, well, I just want to make sure that my paycheck keeps coming in and somehow that's connected to Donald Trump. If that's your bet, if that's the thing you're gambling on, if that's you're pushing all your chips onto that red number, I'm telling you what, you push all those chips onto red 45 and you are in serious trouble. Because the people of this country are too moral, they're too smart, they're too committed to the rule of law and too committed to the conscience of this country that Donald Trump violates on a regular basis. Now I've just turned into like wishful prayer here, but I do think it's true. And I think it's going to come to play on November 6th. I think the effect across the state of Minnesota, I think the effect across the country is going to be a total and complete repudiation. And I hope that Democrats and progressives alike will jump on this and ride this thing and don't let up for a single minute between now and November 6th. It's Doug Paget, AM 950, Progressive Voice of Minnesota. Go. Yeah, it's a little rant from our bumper music guy. We keep a guy around here to do our bumper music, and that's a critique of the economic collapse of 2007. It's a great song called "Death to My Hometown." If you want to be inspired, pull that one up on the places where you listen to music. Springsteen's "The Death of My Hometown." Hey, Brett, you sent this great little article over about some of these takeaways from a New York Times Siena poll of the 3rd and 8th congressional district. Kind of interesting that people at a national level are taking an interest in the congressional districts here in Minnesota.
Yeah, well, that's not only just in Minnesota. So apparently what the New York Times is doing is that they're running ongoing polling in pretty much every congressional district in the entire country. I guess trying to restore some credibility after the infamous polling they did in 2016 when they said there was like a 97% chance on election night that Hillary Clinton would win.
I remember
how that turned out.
It'll be 17 years from now. I'll still be looking back on that and remembering it with a full heart.
That's still just insane. That you should never say in a presidential election someone has a 97% chance to win, because it's a presidential election and anything can happen. That's at least my thoughts.
Yeah.
But anyways, though, they've conducted some polling, and MinnPost put a little article on some takeaways they took from the polling they conducted in CD3 and CD8 to the New York Times. But MinnPost did a little analysis on that. And apparently they're saying Republicans should be quite worried about what's happening in CD3 because Eric Paulson is not doing so well. In fact, they have the average lead 51-42 with Dean Phillips over Eric Paulson, which polls are what they are, but that's not a good thing if you're an incumbent right now.
Say that number again.
51-42.
51-42. Wow.
Yeah.
I give that a 96% chance of Phillips winning. I got to say it right now.
So now, now you just guaranteed that Eric Paulson is going to win.
96% chance. Yeah, it's always a 4% chance.
Yeah. Well, there's still you got to run the scenarios for the 4 times out of 100 where Eric Paulson wins.
Well, I'll tell you, I used the weather app on my phone, and I had my sunroof down in my car, and the weather app when I got in my car said 0% chance of rain, and 6 minutes later it rained on me. So if it can rain with a 0% chance, I guess a 96% chance doesn't lock anything in at all. That's
but Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's tough to take those seriously at any time now after what we've seen in 2016, or really, to even be honest, going back to 2012, a lot of polls showed that Mitt Romney was going to win not only the election but also pretty handily as well. So,
well, I remember that. I remember that with the even with the Bush-Kerry. Remember in the mid-morning, they had to break it to Bush that they thought he wasn't going to win by the turnouts that were happening at the sites, and Kerry was hearing the same thing, and man, midday that whole thing shifted. The Bush campaign, they've written about this in some of their memoirs that they were on. I think they were on Air Force One, having to break the news to the president Bush that he was going to lose his reelection bid. So I mean, these things are really close, and they move on these turnouts. I guess is what it is. These turnout models are the big deal that shapes everything.
Yeah, well, now you just depressed me thinking what would have happened if we had gotten rid of Bush in 2004. But
so many
digress
things.
On that. Yeah,
so many things.
So, yeah, but either way, CD3, according to this polling, is not looking good for Eric Paulson. Even in 2014, they were looking at people who voted in that era, which was a good year for Republicans, and Paulson won by 25 points. Came out in 2018. Phillips leads now by 5 points.
Yeah, that's the devastating line to me in this thing. That even if they saw the kind of when it was a big rage of Republicans, if that number turned out in their polling, these guys giving them a 94.3% chance not winning, that Phillips winning, that Phillips still leads if the turnout is the old 2014 numbers, not even 2016, or what I think is obviously going to be the situation in 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the devastating line, because 2014 was also a horrible turnout election year. I remember going to vote that year.
Mm-hmm.
I think like at 9 a.m. I was like the first person to show up at my polling place. So you can kind of tell how the night was going to go at that point when like pretty much no one was showing up to vote.
They pulled the very first ballot off. You were 0001.
Yeah, we gotta get this out of the plastic covering here. Yeah,
that's awesome. All right, and then, how about the 8th?
Yeah, how about the 8th? This one kind of struck me as interesting, is that I was thinking this would be the one pickup opportunity for Republicans, simply because it's CD8 and Trump is, to the detriment of the rest of the economy, has said, well, we're going to make mining our big issue. So you think Trump would do well there, but not according to this polling, where apparently he's not doing well in that area, where it's Pete Stauber, the Republican, running against Joe Radinovich, who's a longtime Democratic representative in that area. Polling data not looking good for Trump in that area as well. Just looking at some numbers there. Surprisingly, only 13% of people were undecided about who they would vote for.
Wow.
But on that, 51% of those polls didn't know enough about Radinovich to give him a favorable or unfavorable rating, and 45% didn't know enough about Stauber. But still, the big takeaway is that Donald Trump's still not exactly that popular in that district, which really surprised me. I thought this would be one of the few districts where he might see some positive signs.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, that both of these people, because it's an open seat, both of these candidates are unknown to a large percentage of people, especially, if they're not tied into the party system. They wouldn't necessarily know who these people are. So the thing they're going to be looking at is the letter next to their name. And I think that makes a big difference. And that's why I don't think they're going to be looking at the economy. I don't think they're going to be looking at tax cuts or this kind of business. I think they're going to be saying, do I want somebody that's on the side of Trump or not? And there were a lot of Trump voters who didn't say they were Trump voters going into the 2016 election because it was embarrassing, and they voted their conscience anyway, and they didn't want to tell people, but they just did the thing they thought was right, which is confusing as all get out to me. But that's what they did. I think there's a lot of people who are doing the same thing right now when they move away from Trump. They're not saying it. They're not putting it out there. They're just saying, like, yeah, that was a mistake. I wish that I didn't think it would be quite like this. And I think there's a big movement of those people, just enough where in a district like CD8, it's going to make all the difference in the world. And I think the turnout of people who care is going to be so much more than the people who just feel badly about their vote from 2016, that they're not going to find their energy in going out on November 6th.
Yeah, it's all about enthusiasm, and you're seeing it completely on the Democratic side. In fact, Hunter emailed us the other day saying that he's actually run into people door knocking for Republicans who are actually being paid because they have so few people who are enthusiastic about going out there supporting Republicans. That's where
awesome.
they're at right now, and I think that's what it's all about. And I think that's why a lot of these polls have been wrong, is that it's tough to measure that enthusiasm. And at least from my very unscientific views, I think it's Democrats that clearly have the enthusiasm on their side.
Yep, I do too, and I hope that people listening, take that wind in your sail, and know that you're on the right side of this one. And I know it can be really easy to feel like, man, it's been a hard road. But there's a lot of days you can complain about it every single day, and there's one day a year you can do something about it, and that's on November 6th, or early if you register for early voting. So register early and register once. AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota.